Thank you for joining us for another episode of the BlueFletch Enterprise Mobility Roundup podcast. Today, I'm joined by Justin Beals, who's CEO of StrikeGraph. Justin, thank you for being on today.
My pleasure, Brett.
And just for a little caveat or for folks, is Justin and I have known each other for probably almost 20 years now. We used to work together a long time ago. Justin was actually one of the inspirations for starting BlueFletch. So I worked with him, and I'm like, wait, Justin says I could do this. So
when you say inspiration, is it more like I always think that you're like, I can do this better than Justin.
No, I think it's a lot of just you see people and you see how they execute, and they put in the work, put in the time, they make it happen. And you're definitely one of those guys I saw do that. And it's definitely not as a joke, but you're definitely one of these people I look up to, and I appreciate your support along the way. You've definitely been, when I call you, you'll definitely give me advice. So I always appreciate it.
I've of course, not only we've known each other for a long time, but watching you build BlueFletch has been amazing. You're brilliant, and I really have learned so much watching what you've been doing, and you've tasked me to raise my bar in many ways, Brett. So
speaking of raising the bar, a couple of years back, Justin started a company called StrikeGraph. Do you want to tell us what StrikeGraph does and what you guys focus on?
Yeah, absolutely. So StrikeGraph is a security, compliance, operations, and assurance platform. And essentially what we do is we help our customers get the security certifications they need to accelerate sales through trust. And so the typical ones you'll hear about are SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, HIPAA, and there are a bunch of others that we support. But StrikeGraph delivers those certifications to our customers. It's really a critical offering for any company that shares data with other companies.
You mentioned a couple standards there. Is there one standard that's above everything else, or is it industry specific? Like the SOC 2 versus ISO, is one better than the other in certain situations?
There's definitely differences to all of them, but just at a high level, one really good way to think about them is if you were to take a Venn diagram of all the standards, they'd be 80% connected, all of them. So a lot of them ask for the same expectations from a security posture perspective, but there's some differences between each one that are slight. And then they break up, some are more general and some are vertical focused. Some are very specific or at a certain stage of a company or geography. And I'll give you some ideas of that. The SOC 2 and ISO 27001, for example, they're both general business security standards. So they're fairly applicable across multiple vertical solutions and kind of like broad markets and geographies. ISO is very accepted in the United States. It's traditionally been a little bit more European centric and Asia Pac for ISO 27001. SOC 2 is actually approved by the EU Commission as a valid security credential or certificate inside of Europe. So they do cross connect. But if you're selling in Europe, they're going to ask for ISO 27001 a little bit more. And if you're selling in North America, you're going to hear SOC 2. Now, that being said, the implementation, there still are nuances there. SOC 2 is a lot more flexible as a standard. You can think a little bit more about it like a rubric, this is the testing methodology for whatever security you define. ISO 27001 is a little bit more prescriptive. It's going to ask you to do specific things in some moments. And the certification process for ISO 27001 is a lot more complicated. And there's nuance to whether or not you want to get an audit or go for a full certification, which can take up to 3 years sometimes.
So I know for SOC 2, there's like SOC 2 type 2, type 1, which is, I think, like you said, one of them is you have your controls, they're documented. The other is you've gone through a full audit over a period of time. For like ISO and HIPAA and these other ones, are they all different levels too, where it's like, Paladin, Knight, whatever
ISO has that type of situation. You can be ISO 27001 audited on an annual basis, similar to a SOC 2, and never get the quote unquote full certification. And that's, instead of calling it a type 1 or a type 2, that's kind of how they do it. And it's a lot less, there's a bigger group of people that can do audits. Like StrikeGraph can actually perform ISO 27001 audits. But to get certified as a technical term in the ISO world, there has to be a secondary auditor that's involved, a certifying body. And so we have to partner up, with that extra body. And it takes 3 years. You have to go through a number of audits before you get to the full certification. So that one has a little bit of nuance to it. And I would say that 90% of the time we see customers, whether they're European or Canadian or North American, going for that SOC 2 first, and then deciding to go for a second standard. HIPAA, for example, is really interesting. It's a law, not necessarily a security standard. But more and more buyers in the marketplace of health tech solutions are requiring some form of HIPAA audit or certification. And so StrikeGraph provides that, like HIPAA audit or certification, but it's not necessarily a requirement. Like you can claim to be HIPAA compliant, not actually having been tested for it, and create a big liability for yourself if you're not, right? If you have a breach of patient healthcare information, the lawsuit can be very expensive.
Yeah, and this is why my healthcare provider makes me fax everything to them still.
That's right. Yeah. It's
it's
still
so difficult to
digital. Yeah.
They're killing me.
That's actually a good point. Like these standards don't necessarily say what security to implement. So one of the things that I think is like, if you pull back a little bit from all the confusion around the standards, one thing that I recommend for anybody that's listening is what you want to build is a security posture that matches your business and the risks for that business. That's the most efficient and honest and effective security you can put together. And then you want to figure out how that matches to certain standards.
So for a company, so like I know BlueFletch, we came to you guys and our ask was, hey, Google is SOC 2 certified. We want to be like Google. That was just pointed at like the person that was most aligned to us that we sort of looked up to from a company standpoint. If you give advice to like technology companies, where do you have them start? Is it SOC 2? Is that the right place to look at? Or is it, to even take a step back and saying, where are you selling to?
Well, that is the right question to ask from the get-go about which one of these to go after. What are your customers asking for you from hey, I'd like this proof for efficient trust to onboard you as a vendor? And generally what you'll hear is they'll say, do you have a SOC 2 audit or maybe an ISO 27001 certification? And they're kind of giving you a chance to decide. If you're in fintech, PCI DSS could come up more quickly. And then we oftentimes see health tech companies doing the SOC 2 first and then filling out the HIPAA requirements secondarily, because they're trying to sell into a business and they can at least get an initial SOC 2 audit. But that is probably the easiest initial standard to go after.
Got it. And the value of this to a company is what? Like if I'm a software company, like a startup, do I really want to spend 15, 20 grand to go through like 2 years of certification or whatever it costs? Like, what is the value to those companies?
Well, I think if you're a B2B company and you need to share data with your customers, maybe you put yourself in the shoes of the buyer. And this is the thing you might not understand about the buyer's perspective. 70% of major data breaches are coming from third-party vendors. So if you're a buyer in the marketplace and you want to reduce the biggest, weakest surface area in your security posture, you need your vendors to be more secure with their data. But you're not able to go and test every vendor to see how they're doing and look at the work. And the proxy for that is an independent assessment of that vendor's security practice over the prior year. That's a SOC 2 audit. So why is this valuable to a company like BlueFletch or StrikeGraph? We're SOC 2 audited. It's because when that customer wants to buy from us and they're considering the risk that we pose as a vendor, they want an independent assessment of our security practices to a standard. It's the most efficient way for them to trust what we're going to do with their data.
So at that point in time, it becomes a selling tool.
It's a sales asset. And I think if you boil it down, what does StrikeCraft provide? We provide the sales assets like SOC 2 audits or certifications that our customers need to drive revenue.
Yeah. All right. So now we talked about the boring part of the standards and the letter alpha, or the letter soup alphabet.
Sorry about that, by the way. I know it's like super complicated.
No, I like to set the groundwork. I've definitely had people ask me about it, and I feel like your articulation of it is much better than mine. So I appreciate it. I'm just going to point to this and listen to this recording. This will answer your questions.
Yeah.
With changes, especially in the last decade, so things like the mobile phones coming out, cryptocurrency, big data, quantum computing, like how are these standards evolving to match those? Are they evolving at the same pace as those technologies are moving?
No, I mean, I think we have to be honest with ourselves that standards will always be a laggard or a response to changes in the general security environment. But, one of my first jobs in technology where someone cut me a paycheck, it wasn't just for fun, was a security engineer at British Telecom. And I was kind of brand new to the field. This was a while ago, but I quickly learned that they had this idea that like, if we spend enough money on security, if nothing happened, but if something did happen, then we didn't spend enough money on security. So there was no valid way. It was so opinionated about what good security was. And it was such a cost center application where it's like, hey, the CISO recommends we do these things, but is that really the amount of budget we want to spend? And there's no comparative way or quantitative way to even tally up if that was the right amount. When you have that kind of situation in almost any marketplace, what's going to happen is that the community is going to start to coalesce around agreed upon standards or rubrics for testing that they kind of see as valid. They'll never be the most caught up with the latest innovation. Standards are always a laggard, but they're a critical kind of tacit agreement in the marketplace because essentially we're looking for efficiencies. Buyers are looking for efficient ways to decide that this is a vendor that we can work with. And vendors are looking for a way to create an asset that they can use over and over and over again that scales, no matter how many customers they have. They only have to do it once. And so it's okay that the standards aren't fully caught up to the nth degree of security risk in the marketplace, because to be honest with you, it's such a mess of what we were doing in the past that at least we have a baseline expectation for security practices. That being said, few of these standards are dictatorial. Like if you have a mobile device, it doesn't tell you how to secure the mobile device. The standard will say, we expect in the lifecycle of data that you're keeping data secure. Tell us how you're doing that, essentially. And so then if you're a mobile application, you need to highlight how a user hits your application, enters in data, that data is encrypted from device over to a centralized server, that the data on the centralized server system, like the database, is encrypted effectively as well, and any cycle back of the data is encrypted along the wire. So you should have the freedom to develop innovative technology inside of these standards and not feel like this is a security checklist. It won't feel that way.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense, especially as fast as technology moves or changes. With that being said, is there anything specific you're seeing where you think companies should be investing in the next 3 years in regards to new security technologies or new things that in the security space itself that you think are become more commonplace, predominant?
Yeah. I think there's been a renewed focus on an old enemy, which is change management. We saw some big issues in like code injection because so much of developer operations these days is software deployment of infrastructure, and we didn't necessarily have best practices around change management into that, like a Terraform set of code that's deploying your server environment and what the firewall settings are. And so I think that's an area where security practices, there's been a renewed expectation around better security practices that cover broadly how code gets put into the infrastructure deployments. And we saw issues like that with like SolarWinds. That was the SolarWinds hack.
Yeah, change management and paging.
Mhm. Colonial Pipelines hack over the pandemic had a lot to do with them going remote, which they hadn't done before. You know, they were a traditional organization. They went into the office, they did a lot of VPN work at the Wi-Fi unit in the office. And once they got remote, they lost some of that control, and they probably weren't prepared for that.
With that, how do you see remote work changing the security standards, or even the controls and things people are putting in place? What are you seeing that's different than pre-COVID?
I think that, well, we've certainly recommended customers to teams like BlueFletch, where we're like, hey, if you've got a device distribution situation and there's very private data that's getting put out there, you need to think about device management tools and asset management tools. You know, we don't particularly have a mobile device distribution for StrikeGraph. So we certainly worry about our laptops, and we utilize kind of device management tools for laptop devices and making sure that works well. But you're tracing the data, right? The byline on all that is like, where does the sensitive data wind up? Like if you're an IoT product, you're thinking about the data that's coming off of that device out there in the field. What is happening with that data as it travels back? Is it sensitive information at all? Do you need to protect it, or can it be open? And that's really the best way to design the right scope to your security posture. Not like doing everything, but doing the amount that matters. And you can use the standards as a guideline. Like we want to hit SOC 2 as a baseline for good security practices, but then there's going to be opportunity for us to see to enhance that and go beyond where we see the weakest areas or the most the opportunity that if a vulnerability were exploited, it could be quite catastrophic.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of those vulnerabilities. From an attack vector standpoint, are there things that you think we're going to see more from attacks over the next 2 to 4 years that people should be thinking about or trying to get in front of?
There's one attack vector that this might be 5 years out, but I was a little shocked at the progress that was made on a paper that I read recently. There's a research team that has been studying quantum computing, and I think they've made a leap ahead in cracking encryption using quantum computing. Something that we thought was 10 to 15 years out from a quantum computing capability might be a little closer than we originally estimated. And that is going to cause a lot of pain and suffering, because we're really running like 256-bit encryption, you know, PGP style things. We've been using it for a while. It's worked really good. But if there's brute force techniques with quantum computing of changing that, I think that it's going to be difficult. And honestly, there's not a solution on the horizon quite yet, other than making the math even harder for a quantum computer, which may require a quantum computer to build. So I don't know that I have a good answer for it, but it's certainly something that I personally am kind of listening to and considering that researchers may be moving much more quickly than we thought. And quantum computing is here. We have qubit style CPUs operating. There's some sensitivity there.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I went to, that was a presentation IBM gave right before COVID, and the guy was talking about how fast they could crack like SSL, and I started looking at it. That was 3 years ago, when
Right.
they were at like 24, 25 qubit machines, and now they're double, triple that. So it's I think that's the defense in depth and protecting the data, like you said earlier. You can't assume your encryption is going to protect you from that.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess along those lines, do you guys see anything around AI and machine learning that's changing the landscape, or things that you think are going to be like come down from that, either on the protection side or on the attack vector side, that's going to be driven by ML and AI?
I think if you just think about pure security from a digital perspective, like cybersecurity, I think actually one of the interesting things is from an AI, if you're building an AI product and you're kind of live feeding new data into the model to try and constantly enhance your prediction, I think that there's a competitive landscape where people are screwing with each other's models. And it's going to be super hard to tell, right? Like having built some AI products in the past, you've got to build a test harness around your model to look for variations in predictions from a baseline to detect that any amount of change, was through nefarious means that you might not like. And it could be very subtle. That's a little esoteric in a way. I think that there is actually one way that I think about AI and ML around security, especially that's changing our particular solution quite a bit. Over the last year, StrikeGraph has gone from being a system and technology that helped our customers get certifications to being a system and technology that delivers those certifications. And so we have been building tooling to automate the testing of the security control operation. With that's very unique because the practice today is having a human being click through every control and every piece of evidence for the year and making sure it all lines up. It's a very rote practice. It's filled with the fallibility of human analysis. And we've really been revolutionizing the actual certification delivery by going from this kind of ivory tower independence of an expert into deep transparency through technology so that anyone can retest anything that gets tested and be assured that the tests were valid.
In those scenarios, are you pairing up the technology with an expert? So like that, I don't know if you've seen like the chess guys where like Kasparov will have like an AI assistant with him to actually help him be even faster or better. Are you doing it that way, or is it runs automatically and then sends reports and then a guy goes and reviews it after the fact? Like what's the general process for you guys on that?
We started out deeply doing it by hand. So this is almost a year and a half ago, and we were testing ourselves side by side to CPA firms to see what the differences were. Then after we did it a couple of times, we started to see the patterns that were ripe for technology. It's a lot of low-hanging fruit. We solved that right away. So we have about 66% of the testing process automated and verified at this point through code, and no human really has to look at it unless the testing creates a failure moment, and then they go look at what the failure might have been. There's still more work to be done at it, but we've cut, from what used to be like a 10 to 12 week audit process, we've cut it down to 2 weeks, sometimes less. Yeah.
And probably the re-audit too, like where you're rechecking controls is definitely, it's
right.
really important to have your quarterly audits. And I guess just talking about some other technologies, one of the other big things that's changed a lot, especially in the last 11 years, has been around mobile technology with the mobile devices in people's hands out there in different places. You touched on this earlier, but what are the other changes that you're seeing on the security landscape driven by this new advent of, workers aren't at a desk in a building anymore. They're with a laptop in a coffee shop. They have their iPad or their Android device out on, a site somewhere. Like, how is that changing the security landscape?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a little nerve-wracking because the data is just feels like it's flowing out. You don't have much control over which devices and where it's going to. So one place definitely to start is kind of where you can create boundaries. And so certain data may not belong on mobile devices. You want to tell your employees that like, you should use a laptop to work on this. I also think that where you do want to go to a mobile device, you can ask for SOC 2 audits from those vendors as well. So that at least, if you're a buyer in the marketplace, you're looking at the same concern, and you can make sure that a vendor, BlueFletch has done a great job of this. You guys are SOC 2 audited, and so it's something you can provide as you provide securitization of those devices out in the field for people. So ask for that if you're a buyer. look for vendors that provide it to help secure those devices. And then I think that you can also help that vector a lot by segmenting the data sensitivity really well. It's so certain data is public, like your website, and then certain data you might not like to be shared, but it may happen and it's not an impact to your business, right? But then there's definitely very private data, like your production database, but of course you would never just load that up on a mobile device. Yeah.
Yeah, not yet. Not until I have my quantum computer, my phone.
That's right.
That's
not,
terrifying.
not until the AI is like taking our direction for a product and building all the code for us. Yeah, someday.
This is sort of a segue, but do you have any thoughts or opinions around consumer data privacy? So GDPR, CCPA, some of these other standards that are coming out, and how those impact audits and controls that companies have to put in place. Is that something that you guys have run across?
Yeah. So we have a lot of customers that are like, hey, I have bought from StrikeGraph in my subscription, SOC 2 and GDPR or some privacy standard. Especially, I think, like if you're a 10 to 15 person company, it just might not be that big a deal because these are liability standards. So it's more an issue, like if you leak customer data in California, someone can sue you. But it's not that you're not allowed to do business in California. You can go and do business in California, not be California consumer privacy compliant. You're just running the risk that somebody could decide to create a liability. So companies and organizations tend to pay more attention to these things as the liability, as they grow and they have value, and the liability becomes concerning because they could lose that. And then they do ask, they'll start out just wanting in our platform access to the standard so they can just see that they have the right control coverage and that the evidences are there for the operational characteristics of your security. But we're starting to see requests for us to do an audit to GDPR, because if you're already doing the compliance work, why not buy the sales asset and share it with your customers?
Yeah, you touched on something there around, the companies that are sub 15. So for a new startup or somebody who's creating a new venture, that's typically cash constrained, where should they start? They don't have a ton of money to go out and hire a security guy or hire a team to go do audits. Like, what would be the minimum thing you would recommend somebody who's starting out a company who's got like 5 to 10 people? Where should they start? What should they definitely be doing with their product right now?
Yeah, and I think it lines up a lot with our offering. So if you'll bear with me, I'll use us as a little bit of an example of what we do with teams like that. They're probably just getting a prototype or pilot into the marketplace and doing market testing with that. And they probably are asking for some sensitive data. And to get those pilot customers to adopt, they're probably getting asked like, are you SOC 2 auditor, or what are your plans for getting there? When they come to us, what they will typically say is, I do need to get a SOC 2 audit accomplished to bring these deals over the line. Initially, what we can do is we can get a contract in place with them and provide what's called a comfort letter that they're working with StrikeGraph towards a SOC 2, and we'll set in the letter some type of agreement that they're planning on getting through the audit maybe in the next 9 months. Okay, good. So we bought ourselves some time. We can get some deals over the line. And in that 9 months, what we're doing with them is we're helping them design the minimum scope to security that they need that still matches the standard. They're operating it over the 9 months so that as we get to the end of that 9 months, we're prepared to do the testing for them, get the CPA engaged so that they can get the SOC 2 audit and hand it back. I also recommend starting with the SOC 2 Type 1. There's a lot of hype in the marketplace that, hey, you can skip the Type 1 and go to Type 2. But the problem is that the Type 2 is a lot harder and a lot riskier. It's easier to fail a Type 2. And so if you do the Type 1, if it buys you the contract with the customer, and you can wait another 9 months before doing the Type 2, you just don't need to give yourself the pain and the risk of a Type 2 too early. And that 5 to 15 person team, in the first year, they're going to create that initial trust with their customers that this is what they're going to work on. They're going to deliver that they have a SOC 2 report and convert those customers into annual subscriptions. And then they have a compliance path that they're operating and independent assessment of their practices that they can share with future customers. And that really sets them on the path until they're ready to break into a new vertical like healthcare. And all of a sudden they want to start doing HIPAA work, or they're breaking into Europe and they want a more robust standard, something that might bring a sense of better maturity of the organization, like ISO 27001.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so start out with, we're doing it, we're not there yet. Get the letter of attestation saying we're working through it, and then once you close the deals, then you hopefully be able to afford it because you've closed the deals.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Awesome. Well, that was the last question for me. Justin, thank you very much. So key points, I'll go through the key 3 things I learned today. The first one is change management is something we need to from a security standpoint, all be thinking about investing more in. The second one I noted down was, follow the data. So secure the data. The data is the most important piece. And then the third one, which I think you just touched on, is like, as a small company, start out small and, go through the journey and use the journey as a selling tool along the way, even if you haven't gotten there yet. So all really, really good points. And Justin, for folks listening or following along on YouTube, how can people find out more about StrikeGraph?
Yeah, the best place is strikegraph.com. And really, my recommendation is, if you're trying to solve this problem of sales assets for security compliance, like SOC 2, or pick your standard, right on the website that you can chat directly with one of our sales reps, and they'll schedule a demo meeting for you. Our customers make a decision to buy with us really quickly when they get a chance to look at the product and understand, I think most importantly, that StrikeGraph is really focused on getting these certifications in your hand. That is our solution at the end of the day. And it's a little bit unique. We're not an audit firm, but we use technology to deliver super valid testing that is a great sales asset.
Awesome. I'm not getting paid for this, but BlueFletch has been using StrikeGraph for a number of years, and as a security company, we definitely appreciated the tools and making it simple for us to make sure we had all the documentation, especially for our end customers. So a lot of the things Justin touched on earlier, we've used it as a sales asset in a lot of places. So thank you, Justin, for you and what your team's been working on. Really appreciate it. And in closing, if you're interested or have follow-up questions, reach out to Justin's team at strikegraph.com. And thanks for listening along. If you like this podcast, definitely give it a thumbs up or a star, whatever podcast viewer you're listening in. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@bluefletch.com. Thank you again. Thank you very much, Justin. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Coop.